Hey peeps, it's Tripl-L, and now it's time to talk the 7 Deadly Sins, chapter 197, Answers. And man, I am excited to talk about this one. So, this chapter presented us a few things. We got some clarification on what's currently going on in the battle plans. Like, you know, there's a giant pilgrimage of holy knights who have been enraptured by the goodness that is the Demon King due to the commandment of, I think it was piety, and they're heading towards Camelot. We got the appointment of a new what's it called again? Head, you know, like the grand, what's the commander? Is that the title? I forget the title for the anyway, yeah, we know, like the acting commander for the Holy Knights. I think that, or the substitute commander for the Holy Knights. And let's see, what other things do we get? We get the setup for the Diane and the King storyline along with the Ghouta information. Now, saying those things all out loud, you know, it doesn't sound that worthy of my excitement, but there's actually a lot of interesting little details in this particular chapter that really make I feel like I can really talk about this stuff. So let's just get right into it. I guess this chapter starts off with Hauser, and from a writing point of view, or at least from the composition of the panels for this chapter, or the progression of this chapter, it makes sense because Hauser does end up being one of the more important characters here. And the interactions that he had with his father this morning, I think we had gotten a bit of an indication of that kind of relationship in the recent the 7 Deadly Sins anime that was going on. I think Warning of Holy War. You know, forgive me if I get the names wrong, because I think I'm going to be getting a lot of names wrong. Regardless, starting up with Hauser and then transitioning into Merlin by using the status of the town. It was a pretty nice way of doing that. But in this particular scene where we actually see Merlin and she's in the bathtub and, you know, she has Escanor attending to her, there's a few interesting things going on. I mean, aside from Escanor pretty much having the time of his life, because, yeah, Escanor. One thing is that it's daytime and Escanor isn't muscle bound. That's strange, and I hope that they talk about this later. I don't care if it's Merlin using some kind of enchantment or some kind of magic on Escanor. I just want them to acknowledge that Escanor is normal. And, you know, I'm pretty sure it's daytime because Hauser woke up, so it has to be daytime. Anyway, in the bathtub, Merlin is actually reading a really old book titled Commandments. And from just how damaged that book looks, I want to assume that it is a book that probably came from the demon world, and it might have connections to Merlin's personal lineage. Regardless, Merlin is studying up on the commandments, and that is actually a pretty interesting thought. Anyway, while Merlin's in the bathtub, she is pretty much telling everyone the status, or giving us exposition on why the town's working. Meanwhile, she's also telling Escanor that was very pleasing. So I do wonder, is this just Merlin being naturally open as she always is? Or is this Merlin's consideration of Escanor? Is she being aware of his feelings for her? And in this particular chapter, Merlin is being a bit more sentimental, since she is describing the fact that she can't bring back people who have already died or heal the hearts who have been hurt. So she's taking this approach of emotional awareness, and this is something that's very different from Merlin in general. And the way she talks about it makes sense, right? She is this kind of person who would describe it in a roundabout way, but I think this is how she shows that she is at the very least aware of suffering. And I do think that her talking about the fact that she can't fix that is acknowledgement that she, or at least it does show that she cares to a degree, if you understand what I mean. Regardless, the stuff with Merlin and Escanor is pretty interesting, especially the bits with Escanor's poem. I think the fact that Escanor would go, or not go out of his way, but that he would do that kind of thing where he makes a poem for the captain in recognition of what I believed was his and Bond's relationship after knowing that the captain is cursed. I think that's a nice way of establishing him as a friend. It's a nice way of showing that this is how Escanor bonds with his captain. And I do wonder how prideful Escanor would deal with Meliodas. I really want to see that particular interaction. Regardless, it's just that little whole dynamic between him, Escanor, and Bond, it's nice to see, and it's nice to see that the guys do have their back, and it's nice to see that Escanor also wants to compare his girl with Meliodas' girl, and that's funny in a way. It's definitely funny. So the takeaway from this scene is effectively the fact that Merlin's reading that commandment book, the facts or the interactions between Merlin and Escanor, and Merlin's potential emotional awareness of the situation, and Escanor trying to be a nice friend. Then we transition over to the selection of a new Holy Knight captain, and at the end we find out that it's Hauser. And now that makes a lot of sense to me. In the last chapter impressions, I talked about Hauser being in the cover page and wondering if he had some importance. Another character in that cover page that was strange was the cat that's currently with Arthur. But now seeing that Escanor had this being set up for him, it makes sense that he was gonna get that kind of placement in the cover page, and I'm very happy for the character. Angry Anime Fan, another reviewer, he pointed out that it makes sense because Hauser was someone who, in the midst of everything, he was there to kind of keep Gilthunder in line, or at least remind Gilthunder they have priorities and that they have a duty. And even when you look back at the last chapter where he was defending Dreyfus and Hendrickson, and it makes sense, right? Because at the end of the day, I don't think the Holy Knight Captain has to be strong per se. I think he has to be someone who makes it more likely for his own troops to succeed, right? He has to be someone who can properly distribute them around a battlefield and keep in mind the objectives and the priorities. So Hauser has been demonstrating that in the last couple of chapters with his moments, and I think that makes sense. I think I'm okay with it, and especially because when you consider like Zarathus, he did spend a lot of time in the castle distributing people. Like, he wasn't an active force in battle all the time, so I think this is okay, especially because Hauser is kind of on par with Gilthunder in terms of their magic powers or their power levels. So I think this is overall alright. Even in this chapter, it was nice to see how he was still defending Hendrickson and Dreyfus. It's overall just a nice little moment for Hauser, and I really want to see where it goes from here. Now, after this moment, we get the transition over to Merlin and the group again, getting ready to go assemble the Sins, and this is the segue into Ghouta. We find out that Ghouta has been imprisoned because of suspicions of being with the commandments, and we also know that the ones who are asking for him to be released are the king and Merlin. Now, the thing with this part of the chapter is that Ghouta acknowledges himself as the goat sin, or the 7 deadly sins, the goat sin, and also acknowledges himself as Ghouta the selfless. Now, I want to believe that everything's going to be okay, because just because Ghouta regained his identity of the 10 Commandments selflessness, I don't think that says something bad's about to happen, because it's Merlin. Merlin in particular is asking for Ghouta to be released. Merlin, of all people, should be aware that Ghouta got back his commandment, or if she's not, Deathpierce could have at least informed her that that's what they were told by Fraudrin. And I would assume that Ghouta is on Merlin's side overall. So I want to think that this is just going to add an interesting layer to Ghouta, and maybe it's not going to like totally screw things over, but Gouth's the person that would screw things over, either inadvertently or because he was like trying to test something. So I am kind of worried, because I don't know how Ghouta will act out, even though it seems that Merlin seems to have some idea of what, or she should have some idea of what's going on. Merlin, Meliodas, and Ghouta, these guys have known themselves or each other since they were back in the demon world. So, you know, let's hope for something good. Anyway, it transitions to the last part of this chapter, which is now the checkup on King and Diane. King is having a problem getting things to grow. There could be a lot of things that he's trying to grow. The logical one would be wings. The perverted one would be his little weapon. And whether or not it's growing for him, you know, that's unfortunate. Diane shows up, so ideally something would happen. Regardless, Diane shows up with trying to master a dance. So I'm just going to say, if you've been watching these videos for a long time, I'm not particularly excited about the Diane plot or subplot. I'm not excited about memory loss. I'm not. I don't like it. I think it's annoying to have to deal with. I do appreciate the tragedy that it adds to King's development, because, you know, he took 2 steps forward and 10 steps back with Diane. You know, I appreciate that, but like at this point, it's too much, and I am just slightly bothered with it. I hope that at the very least, because this has been going on for well over 60 chapters, with the whole thing with Diane's memory loss, I hope that it's either Diane is back to normal, or we are permanently staying with memory loss Diane. Because at least if she is permanently memory loss Diane, you know, everyone can like let go of the fact that she's not the person she used to be, and now she's effectively recreating her memories. And also it would add more weight to the things that Ghouta was experimenting with. I know it sounds terrible to think of it like that, but I don't like the memory loss plotline at all. I don't like it. It's just something with me, and I apologize for that. Regardless, the next week is going to be the one that's going to be really telling about what's going on with Diane. You know, even if they do something where like the emotions never got forgotten, but like the context of the emotions got forgotten, I'll be okay with that. That's totally fine. I just don't want the memory loss thing to be a severe source of angst for King. I mean, that's the only thing, right? Like, it's just the melodrama. I can do without the melodrama that comes from memory loss. Like, soap operas have that down packed. I don't want that here. Anyway, that's just my opinion on that particular aspect of the 7 Deadly Sins. But overall, I love this chapter. Only because mostly because of the part at the beginning with Merlin and Meliodas and Bon and Escanor. I thought that moment really sold it for me. I really like this chapter. Or really love this chapter. So guys, I'm gonna leave it there. Next week we're going into the King plotline, so my fingers are crossed. My fingers are so crossed. But anyways, peeps, till next time, I hope you have a great day,